everyone, and welcome to blog 18 of the Tackle the Feelings Before the Behaviour parenting approach. And today's blog is going to be entitled How to Prevent Depression from Developing in Your Children Later On. So I'm not going to run through what depression is, but I will put a link at the bottom of this video on my blog that I've written on depression, which spells out the symptoms and everything if that's something you're going through or you want to understand it a bit more. Today I'm just going to talk about depression and what I believe is one of the causes of people developing depression in the first place, and how you can prevent your children from developing this by simply working with their emotions, namely the core emotion that I believe is associated with depression, which is sadness. So I'm going to give you a few tips and some things to do to help your children not develop this horrible suffering illness later on in life. So the first thing I want to talk about is the core emotion, and that's sadness, and why I think this is the fundamental emotion in depression, because it's never straightforward and it's never black and white, and everybody is unique in their experience of depression, and people are unique in their experiences. Some people will have this, some people don't. We're all different. But sadness is an emotion that we have that helps us deal with loss. And so a lot of us think about loss in terms of grief, or in terms of losing someone close to us, or a pet, or something tangible. But loss is much more complicated than that. And this is what we fail to recognize. And loss in general is not dealt with very well, especially in the Western world. Sadness is absolutely not dealt with very well, especially when you're feeling sad and trying to get support for that. People find it a very difficult emotion to be around. So when I talk of loss, it can be a significant person in your life that you have lost in grief and bereavement, or a pet. It can be a loss of property, or a loss of home, or some tangible element, loss of something you hold dear. Or it could also be internal. We have many, many losses that we go through, which is a part of life. And sadness helps us to integrate those losses. Sadness helps us to take a step back from the hubbub of daily life, and it helps us to work through and process this change and transition. And those are key words, change and transition, with loss, because it's not only that you are remembering things in the past. Similarly, think of grief for a person. That's generally what we can associate with. You've got to think of the memories and really reflect back in the past, and the regrets and the woulda, shoulda, couldas. But then there's also the future to think about, and how you're going to carry on without that person, because prior to this loss, you've had them in your future plans. It's been in your worldview, including things outside of losing a person. Anything that you lose, you've got to readapt your worldview to integrate not having that thing anymore, or something being changed because of it. So sadness really gets you to withdraw. It gets you to reflect and process and grieve and mourn the loss. So it makes a rite of passage, so to speak, for you to move into the next phase with this loss as a part of you, not something outside of your worldview that's looming at you. And this comes out in many different ways. A common thing of sadness and loss is tears, and then you can feel a real heaviness, a real ache, and a longing, and heartbreak, and sorrow, and angst. It can have other emotions associated with it, and this is what I'll get into with the whole depression thing as well. It's like an onion. You have sadness, but you also have fear, or you have shame, or you have whatever comes up for you surrounding that core emotion of sadness and loss. A lot of people head to a place of anger because it's a powerful emotion. It sort of helps you to function, and you feel like there's been an injustice to you, having to let go of something that you once loved, depending on what that loss is. And these internal losses that I talk about, they can be anything from loss of childhood, to loss of your single life, to loss of the way you see yourself, to your physical appearance, to feelings that you used to have. The magic of childhood has been lost, or the loss in the faith of humanity, whatever it may be. We're constantly evolving, we're constantly learning, and we're constantly changing. So depression, I believe, happens when we haven't got tools, or we haven't had this sadness and this tool for integrating these losses. It hasn't been regulated or managed earlier on in childhood. So we don't know how to process things that happen to us. We don't deal well with changes, with losses, with this heartache, this sorrow, this heaviness, this fatigue, everything that goes along with a loss. Somewhere along the line, we have not developed those tools. And I think it's very tied in with shame, where not only have we not been given those tools, where it's been a bit neglected and under-regulated in our childhoods, maybe not intentionally, but we also feel shame for not being able to cope, for not being tough, for not being able to just get on and move on and carry on as if nothing's happened, because that's how society sort of expects you to behave. You have a period, maybe a week, maybe a day, depending on how your family unit or your culture or the people around you, we sort of give a time frame for these losses. And those are the tangible ones, when we've got rites of passage and transitioning into new phases in our lives. We don't have any sympathy, we don't have any support in this, really, because it's something that is considered part of life and you've got to get going. But some people, especially more sensitive people, or people who've got other issues going on for them, other traumas in their life, or a tendency towards fear and things like that, this can be very, very difficult. This loss can feel really overwhelming and it doesn't go anywhere. And with sadness, we internalize that and we keep it inside, and it becomes this heavy burden that as you carry on living and taking on more and more loss and more traumas and more change and more everything that life has to offer, it seems to grow. And I believe depression is a result of that growing so big that it sort of saps all the other areas. It gets you into a state of survival. So you're in this state of survival, and it feels like a dark pit. People will describe it like a black dog, or this real darkness that overwhelms you. And there are many reasons that could come into the causes of it, or the predisposing factors that make you more susceptible to developing it. But at the crux of it, we need to look at the emotions and what's not being regulated, what's not being processed. Why are we not able to integrate this sadness, this loss, and all the other emotions that surround it? Have we been shamed? Do we fundamentally feel there's something wrong with us? So the way to regulate this in your children, one thing you will hear is that it's genetic. I'm not sure. I'm not going to put my money on that being the absolute truth here, and it could very well be. But regardless of if it's genetic or if it's something learned, I think that it's important to realize that children who have a parent with depression, or two parents with depression, are going to be met with something that's called a lack of presence, and it's going to affect an attachment between the child and the parent, because the parent's not able to access their own emotions, because it gives you a really flat emotional affect. So the child's not going to be taught a range of emotions because of that lack of the parent's ability to tap into their emotions. So it's about working on yourself. If you are depressed, you've got to get some support in this to make sure that you're giving your child your time and your presence. And even if you're not depressed, but you're busy or things are going on, children need you to give them their full attention. They also need you to validate their emotions, to make their emotions okay. So whatever they're feeling's okay. We need to stay away from trying to distract and cheer people up, especially with sadness, and really make it okay to feel those emotions. Say that it's healthy to feel them. Name those emotions. Help give them words to know what this big, dark mess of unprocessed emotion is, so that they may make sense of it and integrate it and feel empowered in doing so, and recognize it as it comes up later in life, so that they can tap into that, bring it to the surface, not be afraid of it, eliminate that fear of it. There's no shame in feeling what you feel. Nothing is wrong with how you feel. And so it's not something scary, and you can work through it. And once you've worked through an emotion and it's served its purpose, which is ultimately beneficial, it can be released. And so you're not harboring all these emotions inside. It's so important to teach your children about the full range of emotions. It's so important to say that emotions are okay, and educate around how you feel them in your body, how you express them, giving your children tools to cope with the more difficult emotions such as fear, such as sadness, and then giving your presence and soothing your children. Especially with sadness, you want to cuddle, you want to soothe and comfort and be by their side, rather than saying you've got to toughen up. And another thing that is also extremely important is modeling. Modeling being at peace with your own emotions, or if you're not at peace with them, modeling and understanding. Explain to them what's been going on. If you're crying, explain that that's because you're sad, or you're upset, or you're frustrated, or whatever's going on for you. Not the thing itself, not adult issues, because that's my next point. But you want to just talk about the feelings, the emotions that are coming up for you, so that they understand that their biggest role model, which is you, the primary caregiver, also feels that this is a healthy, normal thing to do. If you feel, that gives them permission to feel as well, and they will model you. So if you're not so good in how you're expressing your anger and you're expressing your sadness, and you're saying it's fine when it's not fine, lo and behold, they're going to do the same. But as you know, it's not fine, and it's not fine for them, and they don't have this internal guidance to be okay with their emotions. And the other point I wanted to make was to not burden your children with your adult issues, because this is too overwhelming. They don't have the brain development to process all these adult issues and worries and financial stresses and relationship issues you may be having with people, and your fears and the problems of the world. Try to stop talking about that around them. Try to just keep things age appropriate, because they will get these emotions and they'll get this information. They won't understand it, and that builds up, and it won't get regulated. It develops fear, it develops sadness, it develops anger, and it's not regulated because you don't realize it's happening. And another thing is to build up their self-esteem. So one thing that does build up their self-esteem is that presence that I spoke about, giving your full attention, really listening to them when they talk, but also praising them, finding their strengths and highlighting them to them. Praising every day as often as possible is so important. And that validation of emotions, making things okay, that is what's going to make things feel okay to them. That their emotion, the way they feel, that who they are as people, that is okay. That builds up self-esteem and gives them tools to cope with changes and losses that go on later in life. So the last point I want to finish with is you want to also teach children how to ask for help, how to receive and ask for help. There's no shame in it. We want to eliminate this. We all have to be tough and deal with things on our own and self-soothe. You teach them how to ask you for help. You teach them how to ask teachers for help. And you model asking for help yourself. And all of this, I believe, will help prevent children from having this emotion build up so much that it forms things like depression later on in life. Thank you.